The twins had been walking for less than 5 minutes when Rose heard a voice behind her that made her blood run cold. "What the hell is going on here?" Richard Morgan stood at the edge of their blanket, his face red with anger and something that looked like panic. "Mr. Morgan!" Rose stood up quickly, positioning herself between Richard and the twins. "I can explain." "You directly disobeyed my orders," Richard said, his voice shaking. "You took my sons out of the house without permission. You put them in danger. He stopped abruptly as he noticed Tommy actually standing on his own 2 feet, gripping Rose's leg for balance. Richard's face went pale. "He's standing?" "Yes," Rose said quietly. "Both of them. They took their first steps about 10 minutes ago." Richard Morgan stood frozen in the doorway of his mansion's living room, his briefcase falling from his hand and hitting the marble floor with a crash that echoed through the house. What he saw was impossible. His 18-month-old twin sons, Jay and Tommy, who had never taken a single step, who had never spoken a single word, were actually walking across the carpet on their own 2 feet. And they were talking. "Mama! Mama!" Jay was saying, his tiny voice clear and joyful as he toddled towards someone. "Up! Up!" Tommy echoed, his arms reaching upward. But it wasn't Richard they were calling to. It wasn't their late mother Sophia who had died giving birth to them. It was Rose Bennett, the 26-year-old black nanny Richard had hired just 3 months ago. She was sitting on the floor, tears streaming down her face, her arms open wide as the twins walked toward her on wobbly legs, saying their first words. Richard felt his knees go weak. The doctors had said the twins were delayed, that they might have developmental issues, that their mother's traumatic death during childbirth might have affected them somehow. Specialists had examined them, run tests, prescribed therapies. Nothing had worked. The twins remained silent and still, sitting where they were placed, staring at nothing, as if waiting for something that would never come. Until now. Until Rose. "How?" Richard whispered, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of his son's laughter, a sound he had never heard before. Rose looked up and saw Richard standing there. Her expression shifted from joy to something like fear or guilt, as if she'd been caught doing something wrong instead of accomplishing a miracle. "Mr. Morgan, I can explain." But before she could finish, Jay stumbled and fell. Richard lunged forward in panic, but Rose was faster. She caught the little boy gently, pulling him into her arms. "You're okay, sweet boy," Rose murmured. "You're so brave. You walked all by yourself." Jay looked up at Rose and smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up his whole face. Then he said the word again, the word that broke Richard's heart and healed it at the same time. "Mama." But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began. 6 months earlier, Richard Morgan's mansion was the kind of place people dreamed about. 35 rooms, a swimming pool, tennis courts, and gardens that looked like something from a magazine. Worth $42 million and filled with artwork and furniture that cost more than most people's houses. But it was the saddest, quietest place you could imagine. Richard, at 38 years old, was the CEO of Morgan Industries, a tech company worth billions. He had everything money could buy, everything except the one thing that mattered. His wife Sophia had died 18 months ago during an emergency C-section. The doctors had saved the twins, but they couldn't save her. Richard had been in a business meeting in Tokyo when he got the call. By the time his private jet landed back in New York, Sophia was already gone. The twins, Jay and Tommy, came home from the hospital without a mother. Richard hired nurses and nannies to care for them. He bought the best cribs, the most expensive toys, the finest baby clothes money could buy, but he couldn't bear to hold them. Every time he looked at his sons, he saw Sophia. He saw what he had lost. He saw the choice that had been made, their lives for hers. So Richard did what he knew how to do. He worked. He spent 18 hours a day at the office or on video calls. He provided everything his sons needed except the one thing they needed most, a parent who was present. The nannies came and went, 7 of them in the first year. Some quit because the job was too difficult. Others were fired because Richard found fault with everything they did. They held the babies wrong, they fed them the wrong foods, they didn't follow his detailed schedules closely enough. But the real reason they left was because the house felt haunted. Haunted by Sophia's absence and Richard's grief. Haunted by the silence of 2 babies who never cried, never laughed, never made any sound at all. By the time the twins were 15 months old, Richard was desperate. The doctors said the twins were physically healthy, but developmentally delayed. They weren't walking, they weren't talking, they barely even made eye contact. Sometimes trauma affects children in ways we don't fully understand, Dr. Martinez explained. The circumstances of their birth, the absence of their mother, the lack of consistent emotional connection, all of these factors can impact development. What do I do? Richard asked, his voice hollow. You need someone who can provide what you can't right now. Someone who can give these children the emotional warmth and consistent presence they need to feel safe enough to grow. Little did Richard know, that person was about to walk into his life. Rose Bennett was 26 years old when she applied for the position at the Morgan Mansion. She had been working with children since she was 18, first as a daycare assistant, then as a nanny for wealthy families. But Rose was different from the polished, formally trained nannies that agencies usually sent to billionaires. Rose had grown up in Atlanta, raised by her grandmother after her own mother died when she was young. Her grandmother had taught her that what children needed most wasn't expensive toys or rigid schedules, it was love. Rose had studied early childhood development in community college while working full-time. She couldn't afford a 4-year degree, but she had learned everything she could about child psychology, attachment theory, and developmental milestones. More importantly, she had a natural gift for connecting with children who were struggling. When the agency called about the Morgan position, they warned her. This is a difficult placement. The father is demanding and distant. The twins have developmental delays. 7 nannies have already quit or been fired. Are you sure you want to try? Tell me about the children, Rose said. 18-month-old twin boys. They don't walk, don't talk, barely interact. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong, but something is clearly not right. Rose felt her heart ache. She had seen this before. Children who shut down emotionally when they didn't have a secure attachment figure. It wasn't about intelligence or physical ability. It was about feeling safe enough to grow. I'll take the interview, Rose said. The interview with Richard Morgan lasted exactly 12 minutes. He sat behind his massive desk in his home office, barely looking at Rose as she walked in. Rose noticed everything about him in those first moments. The expensive suit that hung slightly loose, like he'd lost weight, the dark circles under his eyes, the wedding ring he still wore, the framed photo of a beautiful woman, his late wife, turned face down on his desk, as if looking at it was too painful. The twins require strict schedules, Richard said mechanically, not making eye contact. Feeding times, nap times, therapy appointments, everything is written down in these binders. You will follow them exactly. You will keep detailed logs of everything the twins do each day. You will not deviate from the plan. Rose looked at the binders, 5 of them, each as thick as a phone book filled with schedules and charts and instructions. Mr. Morgan, Rose said gently, can I ask you something? Richard looked up, clearly not expecting to be questioned. His eyes met Rose's for the first time, and she saw the depth of pain there. What? When was the last time you held your sons? Richard's face went pale. That's not relevant to... When was the last time you sat on the floor and played with them? When was the last time you sang to them or read them a story? Richard stood up abruptly. If you're not interested in following my instructions, I'm very interested in helping your sons, Rose interrupted quietly. But children aren't machines that run on schedules. They're little people who need connection and warmth. And from what I'm hearing, that's what your boys have been missing. Richard stared at Rose for a long moment. He should have been angry. He should have ended the interview and called the agency to complain. But something in Rose's calm, compassionate voice and the way she looked at him without judgment made him pause. Can you help them? Richard asked, his voice cracking slightly. Can you make them normal? Mr. Morgan, your sons are already normal. They're just hurting. And yes, I believe I can help them heal. Richard hired her on the spot. What happened next would challenge everything Richard thought he knew about his sons, about love, and about what it really means to be a parent. Wait, I need to tell you something crucial about Rose's first day. Rose arrived at the Morgan Mansion on a Monday morning with 2 suitcases, her grandmother's old lullaby book, and a heart full of determination. Mrs. Peters, the head housekeeper, showed Rose to her room, a beautiful suite with its own bathroom and sitting area. Then she led Rose to the nursery where the twins spent most of their time. The nursery was like something from a magazine. custom furniture, expensive mobiles hanging from the ceiling, shelves full of educational toys still in their packages. Everything was perfectly clean and organized. And in the center of the room, sitting on a playmat, were Jay and Tommy. They were beautiful boys with dark curls and serious brown eyes. They sat exactly where they had been placed, not moving, not playing, just staring at nothing. Rose felt her heart break. "This is their schedule," Mrs. Peters said, handing Rose one of the thick binders. "Feeding at 9 a.m., 12 p.m., and 5 p.m., nap from 1 to 3 p.m., physical therapy at 4 p.m., speech therapy at 6 p.m., bath at 7 p.m., bed at 8 p.m. Mr. Morgan reviews the daily logs every evening, so make sure you're detailed." Rose looked at the schedule, then at the twins, then back at the schedule. "Mrs. Peters, can I ask you something? Does anyone ever just play with them?" Mrs. Peters looked uncomfortable. "Play isn't on the schedule, Miss Bennett. Mr. Morgan believes structure is what the twins need." After Mrs. Peters left, Rose stood in the perfect, silent nursery and made a decision. She closed the binder and set it aside. Then she sat down on the floor next to the twins. "Hi, Jay. Hi, Tommy," Rose said softly. "My name is Rose, and I'm going to be taking care of you. But I'm not like the other people who've been here. I'm not going to follow schedules or charts. I'm just going to love you." The twins didn't respond. They didn't even look at her. Rose didn't expect them to. She knew that trust had to be built, not demanded, so Rose just sat with them. She didn't try to make them do anything. She didn't force activities or therapies. She just stayed close, humming softly, letting them get used to her presence. Can you imagine how much courage it takes to ignore a billionaire's explicit instructions on your first day of work? After an hour of just sitting together, Rose reached out slowly and gently touched Jay's hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't respond either. "That's okay, sweet boy," Rose murmured. "We have all the time in the world." By the end of the first week, Rose had completely abandoned Richard's schedules. She fed the twins when they seemed hungry, put them down for naps when they seemed tired, and spent the rest of the time just being present with them. She talked to them constantly, even though they never talked back. She sang to them, old songs her grandmother had taught her. She held them, rocked them, stroked their hair. And slowly, very slowly, something began to change. Little did anyone know, Rose was documenting everything, but not in the way Richard had instructed. While Richard's official log showed that Rose was following his schedules, Rose was keeping her own notebook, a simple spiral-bound journal where she recorded what really mattered. Day 3. Jay made eye contact for 2 seconds today when I was singing. First time he's really looked at anyone. Day 5. Tommy leaned into my shoulder when I held him. Didn't pull away like he used to. Day 8. Both twins smiled when I blew bubbles. Real smiles. First positive emotion I've seen. Day 12. Jay reached for a toy today. First independent movement towards something he wanted. Rose was seeing progress, but she knew Richard wouldn't understand it. He wanted measurable milestones. First steps, first words, things he could check off a list. What Rose was documenting was more subtle, but more important. The twins were learning to trust again. They were learning that the world could be safe and warm. They were healing from trauma Richard didn't even realize they had experienced. By the end of the first month, the changes were undeniable. The twins made eye contact regularly. They reached for Rose when she entered the room. They laughed at her silly faces and songs, but they still weren't walking, still weren't talking. Richard noticed the changes but didn't understand them. "Miss Bennett, the twins seem more responsive, but they still aren't hitting their developmental milestones. The speech therapist says they should be saying words by now." "Mr. Morgan, can I show you something?" Rose asked. She opened her secret notebook and showed Richard page after page of observations. The twins' first real smiles. Their first intentional reach for a toy. The day Jay let Rose feed him without turning his head away. The day Tommy fell asleep in her arms instead of staying rigidly awake. "These are milestones too," Rose said gently. "Emotional milestones. Your sons are learning to feel safe. That has to come before they can focus on walking and talking." Richard stared at the notebook, seeing his son's progress in a way he never had before. He felt something crack open in his chest. Grief, guilt, and something else. Hope. He also noticed something else. Rose's handwriting was neat and careful, her observations thoughtful and detailed. She wasn't just some young girl playing at being a nanny. She truly understood child development in a way that impressed him. "How long?" Richard asked quietly. "How long until they're normal?" "They're already perfect, Mr. Morgan. They just need time. And they need you." The last words hung in the air between them. Richard looked away, unable to face that truth yet. But neither of them knew that in exactly 17 days, everything would change in a way that would shock them both. It happened on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, 2 months after Rose had started working for the Morgan family. Rose had been feeling frustrated with the twins' confinement. They spent all their time in the mansion, in controlled environments, never experiencing the world outside. "Mrs. Peters," Rose said that morning, "I'd like to take the twins to the park today." Mrs. Peters looked horrified. "Miss Bennett, that's not on the schedule. Mr. Morgan doesn't allow the twins to leave the property without his explicit permission." "Then I'll ask him," Rose said firmly. She called Richard at his office. "Mr. Morgan, the twins need fresh air and new experiences. I want to take them to the park." "Absolutely not," Richard said immediately. "It's not safe. They could get sick. Someone could hurt them. There are too many variables I can't control." "Mr. Morgan, your sons are not fragile museum pieces. They're children who need to experience life." "The answer is no, Miss Bennett. That's final." Rose hung up the phone and stood in the nursery, looking at Jay and Tommy sitting on their playmat. They were making progress in the controlled environment of the house, but Rose knew they needed more. They needed to feel grass under their hands, hear birds singing, see other children playing. She made a decision that could cost her her job. Rose dressed the twins in warm clothes, put them in their double stroller, and walked out the front door. What happened next still gives me chills. Rose pushed the double stroller through the gates of Central Park, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. She had just disobeyed a direct order from her billionaire employer. She could be fired the moment she returned. But when she looked down at Jay and Tommy, their eyes wide as they took in the trees, the sky, the sounds of birds and children playing, she knew she had made the right choice. "Look, boys," Rose said softly, kneeling beside the stroller. "See those leaves? They're turning orange and red because it's fall. And listen, can you hear the birds singing?" For the first time since Rose had met them, the twins looked truly alert. Their heads turned toward the sounds. Their eyes tracked the movement of squirrels running up trees. Rose found a quiet spot on the grass, away from the crowds but where they could still see other children playing. She spread out a blanket and carefully lifted Jay and Tommy from their stroller, sitting them on the soft fabric. Then Rose did something she had been wanting to do for weeks. She took off the twins' shoes and socks, letting their bare feet touch the grass. Tommy's eyes went wide. He looked down at his feet, feeling the cool grass between his toes. Then he did something amazing. He laughed. A real, genuine belly laugh that made Rose's eyes fill with tears. Jay reached down and grabbed a handful of grass, bringing it close to his face to examine it. He was curious, engaged, present in a way Rose had never seen before. "That's right, sweet boys," Rose murmured. "The world is full of amazing things. You just needed someone to show you." For the next hour, Rose let the twins explore at their own pace. She didn't rush them or force them to do anything. She just stayed close, narrating what they were experiencing, encouraging their curiosity. Then, something miraculous happened. A little girl, maybe 2 years old, toddled over to their blanket. She was holding a dandelion and offered it to Tommy with a shy smile. Tommy stared at the girl for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached out his hand toward the flower. But the girl was just out of reach. The flower was just beyond Tommy's fingertips. Rose held her breath, not wanting to interfere. Tommy looked at the flower, then at his legs, then back at the flower. Rose could almost see the wheels turning in his little mind. And then, impossibly, miraculously, Tommy pushed himself up onto his knees. His legs shook with the effort, but he was supporting his own weight for the first time in his life. "Tommy!" Rose gasped. "You're doing it, baby! You're so strong!" Encouraged by Rose's excitement, Tommy pushed harder. He got one foot under himself, then the other. He was crouching now, his whole body trembling with effort. The little girl giggled and held the flower out further, as if she understood what Tommy was trying to do. And then Tommy stood up. Actually stood on his own 2 feet, wobbling and shaking, but standing. He took one step, then another, then a third. He walked 3 whole steps before falling into Rose's arms. Rose was crying and laughing at the same time. "Tommy, you walked! You did it!" Jay, seeing his brother's accomplishment, looked determined. He planted his hands on the ground and pushed himself up. It took him longer, and his movements were shakier, but within minutes Jay was standing too. The twins had been walking for less than 5 minutes when Rose heard a voice behind her that made her blood run cold. "What the hell is going on here?" Little did Rose know, this confrontation would lead to the most important conversation of her life. Richard Morgan stood at the edge of their blanket, his face red with anger and something that looked like panic. "Mr. Morgan," Rose stood up quickly, positioning herself between Richard and the twins. "I can explain." "You directly disobeyed my orders," Richard said, his voice shaking. "You took my sons out of the house without permission. You put them in danger. You—" He stopped abruptly as he noticed Tommy actually standing on his own 2 feet, gripping Rose's leg for balance. Richard's face went pale. "He's standing?" "Yes," Rose said quietly. "Both of them. They took their first steps about 10 minutes ago." Richard stared at his sons like he was seeing them for the first time. Jay was pulling himself up using Rose's other leg, his face showing fierce concentration as he got his feet under him. "How?" Richard whispered. "They needed motivation," Rose explained gently. "They needed something they wanted badly enough to try. In the house, everything was brought to them. Out here, there's so much to explore that they had a reason to move." Richard sank down onto the blanket, his legs seeming unable to hold him anymore. He watched as Jay took 2 wobbly steps toward a butterfly before falling onto his bottom. But instead of crying, Jay laughed and immediately tried to get back up. "I thought," Richard's voice cracked, "I thought keeping them safe meant keeping them inside, controlling everything, making sure nothing bad could happen to them." "Mr. Morgan," Rose sat down beside him, "nothing bad happened to them today. Something wonderful happened. They discovered they could move, they could explore, they could be brave." Richard put his face in his hands. "I've been so afraid of losing them that I forgot they needed to live. Can you imagine finally realizing that your fear had been hurting the people you loved most?" Rose placed a gentle hand on Richard's shoulder. "It's not too late. They're still so young. There's still time to be the father they need." Richard looked up at Rose, his eyes red. "I don't know how. I don't know how to be what they need." "Then let me help you," Rose said simply. "Let me show you." What happened next would begin Richard's own healing journey. That evening, after the twins were bathed and put to bed, Richard asked Rose to meet him in his study. Rose walked in nervously, still expecting to be fired for her disobedience. But Richard wasn't sitting behind his desk in his usual position of power. He was sitting in one of the armchairs by the fireplace, and he gestured for Rose to sit in the other. "Miss Bennett, Rose, I owe you an apology," Richard began. "Several apologies, actually." Rose stayed quiet, letting him continue. "I hired you to follow my instructions, and when you didn't, I was furious. But you were right to disobey me. You saw what my sons needed when I couldn't see it myself." Richard leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" "Of course." "I blamed them," Richard said quietly. "The twins, for Sophia's death. I know that's horrible. I know they're innocent. But every time I looked at them, all I could think was that she died giving them life, that they took her from me." Rose felt her heart ache for this broken man. "Mr. Morgan, please call me Richard. Richard, grief isn't logical. You can't control what you feel, but you can control what you do with those feelings." "I know. And what I did was abandon my sons emotionally while convincing myself I was protecting them. I threw money at the problem instead of giving them what they actually needed, a parent who was present." Richard looked at Rose with raw honesty. "Watching them today in the park, seeing them laugh and explore and take their first steps, I realized I've missed everything. All their progress, all their small victories. I've been so busy grieving Sophia that I forgot to celebrate the 2 pieces of her that are still here." "It's not too late," Rose said gently. "Jay and Tommy are still so young. You can still be part of their lives in a meaningful way." "Will you help me?" Richard asked. "Not just as their nanny, but as, I don't know what to call it. A partner in raising them? Someone who can teach me how to connect with them?" Rose smiled. "I'd be honored." But that's when they discovered something that would make everything even more complicated. The next morning, Richard made a decision he had been avoiding for 18 months. He asked Rose to help him go through Sophia's belongings. Sophia's bedroom had been locked since her death. Richard couldn't bear to enter it, to see her clothes still hanging in the closet, her books on the nightstand, her perfume on the dresser. But if he was going to move forward, he needed to stop running from the past. Rose stood beside Richard as he unlocked the door. The room was exactly as Sophia had left it, frozen in time. She was excited about the twins, Richard said softly, running his hand over the empty crib that had been set up in the corner. She had already picked out names, decorated the nursery, read every parenting book she could find. She was going to be an amazing mother. Rose noticed a large wooden box on Sophia's desk. "What's in there?" Richard opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of items, recipes written in Sophia's handwriting, a journal, photographs, and a small book of handwritten songs. "She was making this for the twins," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "A box of memories and traditions from her family. She wanted them to know where they came from, even if—" His voice trailed off. Rose picked up the book of songs. They were lullabies, each one carefully written out with notes about when Sophia's mother had sung them to her as a child. "Richard, this is beautiful. The twins should have this. They should know their mother through her words, her recipes, her songs." Richard nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I've been so focused on my grief that I forgot Jay and Tommy lost her too. They'll never know how much she loved them, how excited she was to meet them." "Then we'll show them," Rose said firmly. "We'll cook her recipes with them, we'll sing her songs, we'll read them her journal entries about how she imagined their future. We'll make sure they know Sophia not as a tragedy, but as their mother who loved them before she ever met them. Wait, I need to tell you something crucial about what happened when they brought Sophia's box to the twins." That afternoon, Rose and Richard sat on the floor of the nursery with Jay and Tommy. Between them was Sophia's box. "Boys," Richard said, his voice shaking slightly, "I want to tell you about your mama, your first mama, who loved you so much." Rose opened the lullaby book and began to sing one of Sophia's songs. It was a gentle melody about stars and dreams and love that lasts forever. As Rose sang, something extraordinary happened. The twins, who had only just started making sounds, began to hum along, not with words but with little melodic sounds that matched the tune. Richard watched in amazement. "How are they doing that?" "Music is one of the first things babies recognize," Rose explained softly. "Some researchers think babies can hear and remember songs from when they were in the womb." Richard's eyes widened. "You think they remember Sophia singing to them?" "Maybe. Or maybe they just recognize something that feels like love." Richard reached out tentatively and picked up Jay, holding his son for the first time in months. Jay looked up at his father with curious eyes, then reached up and touched Richard's face. "Hi, buddy," Richard whispered. "I'm your daddy, and I'm sorry it took me so long to really see you." Tommy crawled over and pulled himself up using Richard's knee. Richard laughed through his tears and picked up Tommy too, holding both his sons for the first time since they'd come home from the hospital. Rose watched this moment of healing with tears streaming down her face. This was what she had been working toward, not just getting the twins to walk and talk, but helping this broken family find each other again. What happened next still gives me chills. Over the next few weeks, everything changed in the Morgan household. Richard rearranged his work schedule to spend mornings and evenings with the twins. He sat on the floor with them, played with them, read to them. He learned to change diapers, to make bottles, to soothe them when they cried. And most importantly, he started to heal. Rose taught Richard how to engage with Jay and Tommy. She showed him games that encouraged their development, songs that made them laugh, ways to communicate that built trust and connection. Richard and Rose worked together as a team, co-parenting the twins in a way that felt natural and right. There was no romance between them. Their age difference and professional relationship made that inappropriate, but they developed a deep friendship based on their shared love for the boys. Mrs. Peters and the other staff noticed the transformation. The mansion that had been silent and sad for so long was now filled with laughter, music, and the sound of two little boys babbling and experimenting with their voices. One evening, about 3 months after the day at the park, Richard was sitting on the floor building a tower of blocks with Jay while Rose helped Tommy practice walking. Richard stacked the blocks carefully, making the tower as tall as he could. "Ready, Jay? Watch Daddy knock it down." Richard pushed the tower over, and the blocks scattered everywhere. Jay squealed with delight and clapped his hands. Then, clear as a bell, Jay said his second word. "Dada." Richard froze. "Did he just—" "Dada, Dada," Jay repeated, pointing at Richard with a huge smile. Tommy, not wanting to be left out, toddled over to Richard and grabbed his sleeve. "Dada!" he echoed. Richard pulled both boys into his arms, sobbing with joy. "Yes, yes, I'm your Dada. I'm here, boys. I'm finally here." Rose watched from across the room, her heart full. This was what success looked like. Not just twins who could walk and talk, but a father who had found his way back to life and love. But there was one more challenge they would face together. 2 weeks later, Richard's sister Claire came to visit. She lived in California and hadn't seen Richard or the twins since Sophia's funeral. Claire was shocked by the transformation in her brother. He looked healthier, happier, more alive than he had in years. And the twins were running around, chattering, laughing, completely different from the silent, still babies she remembered. But Claire was troubled by one thing: Rose's role in the family. "Richard, can we talk privately?" Claire asked after dinner. In Richard's study, Claire got straight to the point. "I'm concerned about your relationship with the nanny." "Rose? What about her?" "She seems very involved. The twins call her Mama. You two work together like partners. I'm just worried about boundaries." Richard felt defensive. "Rose saved my son's lives, Claire. Not literally, but emotionally. She gave them what I couldn't give them." "I understand that. But Richard, she's an employee. The twins calling her Mama seems inappropriate. What happens when she moves on to another job? The boys will be devastated." Richard hadn't thought about that. The idea of Rose leaving made his chest tight with anxiety. Not because of romantic feelings, but because she had become an essential part of their family. "I can't think about that right now," Richard admitted. "Rose is here now, and she's helping us heal. Can you imagine realizing that someone you hired as an employee had become irreplaceable?" But that's when Claire said something that would change everything. "Richard," Claire said gently, "I think you need to make a decision. Either Rose is an employee, in which case you need to establish professional boundaries, or she's family, in which case you need to acknowledge that and treat her accordingly." "What do you mean?" "I mean you can't have it both ways. You can't have her be the twins' primary caregiver, their emotional anchor, the person they call Mama, and then also treat her like hired help who could be let go at any time." Richard sat back in his chair, processing his sister's words. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you need to have an honest conversation with Rose about what role she wants to play in the twins' lives long term. If she sees this as just a job, that's fine. But then you need to start transitioning the twins away from calling her Mama and prepare them for her eventual departure. But if she wants to be a permanent part of this family, then you need to formalize that somehow." Richard knew his sister was right. He had been so focused on day-to-day life that he hadn't thought about the future. What would happen when the twins were older? Would Rose stay? Would she want to? That night, Richard asked Rose for another conversation in his study. "Rose, I need to ask you something important," Richard began. "What do you see as your future with our family?" Rose looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "My sister pointed out that your role has evolved beyond a typical nanny position. The twins call you Mama. We make parenting decisions together. You're not just their caregiver. You're a central part of their lives. But we've never talked about whether that's sustainable long term." Rose was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Richard, I love Jay and Tommy like they're my own children. When they call me Mama, it makes my heart full. But I also know they're not my children. They're yours." "But they need you," Richard said. "I need you, not romantically," he added quickly, "but as a co-parent, as a partner in raising them. I can't imagine doing this without you." "Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking if you would consider staying permanently. Not as an employee, but as, I don't know what to call it. A guardian, a second parent. We could draw up legal agreements that give you parental rights. Make sure you're always part of their lives." Rose felt tears in her eyes. "You would do that?" Rose, you've given me my life back. You've helped my sons become the happy, healthy children they're meant to be. I trust you completely. The question is, do you want this? Do you want to be tied to this family permanently? What Rose said next would determine all their futures. Yes, Rose said simply. Yes, I want to be part of this family. Not because of money or security, but because I love those boys. And I want to be there for every milestone, every challenge, every moment of their lives. Richard smiled with relief. Then let's make it official. I'll have my lawyers draw up guardianship papers. You'll have legal rights as their co-parent. We'll figure out the details together. Over the next few months, Rose's role in the family was formally recognized. She moved from the staff quarters to a suite near the nursery. She had equal say in all decisions about the twins' care, education, and future. She became, in every way that mattered, their second parent. The twins thrived with two parents who loved them, who worked together to meet their needs, who showed them through actions what family really meant. Richard continued therapy to process his grief over Sophia's death. He learned to remember his late wife with joy instead of pain, to celebrate the life they had shared, while also embracing the new life he was building. Rose finished her degree in early childhood development with Richard's encouragement and financial support. She became even more knowledgeable about child psychology and development, which benefited the twins enormously. And the twins, Jay and Tommy, grew into happy, talkative, adventurous little boys who loved exploring, learning, and spending time with both their Dada and their Mama Rose. On the twins' second birthday, Richard and Rose threw them a party in the garden. It was a small gathering, just family and a few close friends, but it was filled with love and laughter. As Richard watched Jay and Tommy run around playing with other children, he marveled at how far they had all come. 2 years ago, he had been drowning in grief, convinced his sons would never be normal. Now, watching them laugh and play, he realized they weren't just normal, they were extraordinary. Rose came to stand beside him, holding 2 pieces of birthday cake. "Can you believe how much they've grown?" Rose asked. "Because of you," Richard said. "You saved us, Rose. All 3 of us." Rose shook her head. "We saved each other. You gave me a family when I didn't have one. The twins gave me purpose, and together we all learned to heal." Richard raised his glass. To chosen family, to second chances, to finding love in unexpected places. Rose clinked her glass against his. To the journey ahead. As the sun set over the garden and the twins blew out their candles surrounded by people who loved them, Richard thought about everything that had changed since the day Rose walked into their lives. His sons had learned to walk and talk, but more importantly, they had learned to trust, to love, to be brave. And Richard had learned the most important lesson of all, that healing doesn't come from control or protection. It comes from connection, from letting people in, from being vulnerable enough to accept help from someone you never expected would save your life. The twins called 2 people Mama, Sophia, who they knew through stories and songs, and Rose, who they knew through daily love and presence. And Richard had learned that loving Sophia's memory didn't mean he couldn't embrace the new family they had built. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expected. Sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves us through the hard times. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children isn't protection from every danger. It's the freedom to explore, to grow, to become exactly who they're meant to be. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more.